They gave him a burger and a Coke at the camp, and the Japanese POW started crying mid-bite. The air hung thick and heavy, a palpable shroud woven from dust, despair, and the acrid stench of burning metal. It was a world fractured, a mosaic of shattered landscapes and even more shattered lives, where the very concept of humanity seemed to have been left behind on some distant, forgotten battlefield. The year was 1944, and the inferno of the Second World War raged with a ferocity that threatened to consume everything in its path. Cities lay in ruins, landscapes bore the scars of relentless bombardment, and the relentless march of armies had long ago blurred the lines between aggressor and victim, between right and wrong. In this crucible of unimaginable suffering, where the drumbeat of war dictated every breath, every thought, every desperate act, it was easy for the soul to harden, for the heart to turn to stone. The stories that echoed through the ravaged lands were tales of unimaginable cruelty, of unspeakable loss, of a dehumanization so profound that it seemed to strip away the very essence of what it meant to be human. Fear was a constant companion, a cold hand clenching the throat, and survival was a brutal, all-consuming imperative. Yet, within this maelstrom of destruction, a different kind of story, a quieter, more profound narrative was unfolding. It was a narrative written not in the thunder of artillery, but in the hushed whispers of shared humanity, in the fleeting glances that transcended animosity, in the unexpected acts of kindness that bloomed like fragile wildflowers in the desolate terrain of war. This is not a story of grand battles or strategic victories, nor of the political machinations that plunged the world into darkness. Instead, it is an exploration of the quiet moments, the almost invisible threads of compassion that persisted even when the world seemed determined to unravel. It is about those who, standing on opposing sides of a chasm of hatred and ideology, found within themselves the capacity for empathy, for understanding, for a shared recognition of a common humanity. We will journey through the brutal realities of prisoner of war camps, through the desolate landscapes of contested territories, and into the hearts of individuals who, faced with the ultimate test of their character, chose a path that defied the prevailing narrative of animosity. Our focus will be on the true accounts, the documented instances where the instinct for self-preservation was momentarily eclipsed by an even more potent, more ancient instinct, the instinct to connect, to offer solace, to acknowledge the shared pain of another, even an enemy. These are not tales of capitulation or weakness, but of an extraordinary inner strength, a resilience of the spirit that found expression in gestures so simple, yet so profound, they could momentarily halt the relentless march of war. Consider the stark reality of the POW camps, places designed to strip away identity and dignity, to reduce men to numbers and their existence to a state of perpetual deprivation. Within these barbed wire confines, where hunger was a constant ache and the threat of violence a daily specter, the human spirit was tested to its absolute limit. It was here, in the heart of such despair, that extraordinary acts of grace could emerge, defying the very purpose of the camp and the war that created it. These were moments that existed outside the grand strategies and ideological battles, personal encounters that spoke to a deeper truth about our shared existence. They were fleeting, often unrecorded by official histories, yet they held the power to illuminate the enduring capacity for good that lies dormant within us, even in the most dire circumstances. Our journey will delve into these forgotten corners, seeking out the echoes of these moments, not to sanitize the horrors of war, but to understand the remarkable resilience of the human heart. The specific focus of this narrative will be on instances where individuals, driven by an innate sense of empathy, extended a hand of compassion to those they were officially designated to hate or even destroy. We will explore the psychological underpinnings of such actions, delving into the science of altruism and the complex interplay of emotions that can override ingrained hostility. This is not about excusing the actions of warring factions, but about understanding the profound and often surprising ways in which individuals can transcend the collective narrative of conflict. The title itself, "They gave him a burger and a Coke at the camp, and the Japanese POW started crying mid-bite," hints at the specific nature of these encounters. It speaks to a moment of profound, almost accidental humanity that pierced through the hardened shell of conflict, leading to an overwhelming emotional release. This single image encapsulates the essence of our exploration, the unexpected nourishment of the soul amidst the desolation of war, the simple offering that unlocks a torrent of pent-up emotion, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. We will weave together meticulously researched historical accounts with evocative prose, creating a tapestry of experiences that resonate with our contemporary understanding of human behavior. The narrative will build suspense, not just through the inherent dangers of wartime, but through the emotional tension of these encounters. We will explore the internal conflicts of those who chose compassion, the risks they took, and the profound impact their actions had, not only on the recipients of their kindness, but on themselves. This is a journey into the heart of darkness, but with a guiding light, the unwavering flame of human empathy. The script will unfold, not as a dry historical account, but as an immersive emotional experience, drawing the audience into the very fabric of these historical moments, allowing them to feel the weight of the war, the sting of fear, and the surprising warmth of a shared moment of grace. The challenge lies in capturing the raw, unvarnished truth of these events without succumbing to sentimentality. We aim for authenticity, for a portrayal that acknowledges the brutality of war while simultaneously celebrating the indomitable spirit of humanity. The introduction sets the stage for this delicate balance, establishing the context of widespread conflict and the pervasive atmosphere of fear and hostility. It then pivots to introduce the central premise: the existence of profound acts of compassion, even between enemies. This script is a testament to the idea that even in the most inhumane of circumstances, the human capacity for kindness can endure, and, in doing so, offer a flicker of hope. It is a reminder that the stories of war are not solely of destruction, but also of the quiet, persistent resilience of the human spirit, capable of finding light even in the deepest of shadows. The landscape of global conflict during the Second World War was a canvas painted in broad strokes of despair and destruction, a testament to humanity's capacity for organized devastation. Yet, beneath the thunderous roar of artillery and the chilling finality of pronouncements of war, a different kind of narrative was being etched, one whispered in the silent language of shared vulnerability. It is into this complex and often contradictory tapestry that we now venture, to uncover the extraordinary instances where the stark lines of enemy combatants blurred, softened, and, in fleeting but powerful moments, dissolved entirely. Our exploration is not an attempt to diminish the suffering or to overlook the immense tragedies that define this era. Rather, it is a deliberate act of seeking out the counter-narrative, the stories that, though often overshadowed by the grander, more violent tales, offer a profound and inspiring glimpse into the enduring strength of the human spirit. We aim to present a deeply human and emotionally resonant account, focusing on the true, documented gestures of empathy and compassion that occurred between adversaries. This script is conceived as a literary and documentary narrative, designed to immerse the audience in the emotional reality of war, while grounding them in historical fact. The core of our endeavor is to reveal how, amidst the pervasive climate of hatred and fear, individuals found the capacity for acts of profound kindness, forgiveness, and solidarity. We will navigate through harrowing accounts of conflict, juxtaposing them with moments of unexpected grace, creating a dynamic interplay between tension and redemption, drama and emotional relief. This approach will allow us to explore the complexities of human behavior under extreme duress, showcasing how, even when stripped of comfort and safety, the innate human drive for connection and empathy can surface. The intention is to inspire, to demonstrate that even in the darkest hours, the light of human goodness could not be extinguished. The specific narrative arc will begin with a palpable sense of wartime tension, a scene that immediately immerses the viewer in the harsh realities of the era. This initial intensity will serve as a stark contrast to the unexpected act of compassion that will follow, acting as a powerful hook. This unexpected gesture will then initiate a deeper exploration of its immediate and long-term consequences, tracing the ripple effect of a single act of kindness. We will delve into the transformation that such an event can catalyze, both in the individual who offers the gesture and the one who receives it. The narrative will then broaden to consider the wider implications, the echoes of these acts in the present day, and conclude with a poetic reflection on the universal power of empathy and forgiveness. This structured approach, moving from immediate impact to lasting legacy, is designed to create a deeply moving and thought-provoking experience for the audience. Our storytelling will be characterized by vivid sensory descriptions that bring the historical settings to life, allowing the audience to feel the grit of the trenches, the chill of a POW camp, the oppressive weight of fear. The language will be clear and accessible, yet infused with a poetic rhythm and evocative metaphors that amplify the emotional resonance of the stories. We will employ a narrative voice that is both warm and human, guiding the audience through these complex emotional landscapes with sensitivity and a profound understanding of the human condition. The inclusion of specific elements such as brief psychological insights into altruism and empathy during conflict, alongside personal testimonies or letters from the period, will add layers of authenticity and intellectual depth to the emotional core of the narrative. The overarching theme is the enduring power of human connection, the idea that even when nations are at war, individuals can find common ground. This is not a naive idealism, but a grounded exploration of documented instances where empathy triumphed over animosity. The concluding message will be one of enduring hope, acknowledging that while kindness may not end wars, it certainly survives them, a testament to the resilience and fundamental goodness that can persist even in the face of unimaginable darkness. This script is an invitation to remember these quiet acts of courage, these echoes of humanity that continue to resonate, reminding us of what truly matters. The early days of the Second World War were a descent into a maelstrom of unprecedented conflict, a global conflagration that threatened to engulf the very notion of civility. Nations once bound by fragile alliances and shared aspirations found themselves locked in a brutal struggle for survival, fueled by ideologies that pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The propaganda machines on all sides worked tirelessly to dehumanize the enemy, painting them as monstrous figures devoid of any recognizable humanity, thus justifying the escalating violence and the attendant atrocities. In this charged atmosphere, where suspicion was a currency and fear a constant companion, the very idea of empathy towards an adversary seemed not only improbable, but dangerously naive. The prevailing narrative was one of unyielding animosity, of a zero-sum game where the victory of one side necessarily meant the utter annihilation of the other. It was a time when the world seemed to have collectively lost its way, collectively silenced the whispers of compassion in favor of the deafening roar of war. Yet, even within this bleak and unforgiving landscape, the human spirit proved to be remarkably resilient, capable of acts that defied the prevailing narrative of hatred. These were not grand, sweeping gestures that altered the course of nations, but small, often clandestine moments of shared humanity that offered a glimmer of light in the pervasive darkness. They were instances where individuals, caught in the machinery of war, found within themselves the courage to look beyond the uniform, beyond the label of enemy, and to see the fellow human beings suffering alongside them. Our narrative seeks to unearth these forgotten stories, to bring to light the quiet acts of grace that occurred amidst the chaos and destruction, demonstrating that even in the crucible of total war, the capacity for empathy and compassion could not be entirely extinguished. Our focus, therefore, is on the true accounts, the documented instances where individuals on opposing sides of the conflict extended acts of kindness, forgiveness, and solidarity. We will explore the psychological underpinnings of such behavior, delving into the science of altruism and the complex interplay of emotions that can lead individuals to transcend ingrained hostility. This is not an attempt to sanitize the horrors of war or to suggest that such acts were commonplace. Instead, it is a deliberate exploration of the exceptions, the moments that highlight the enduring strength of the human spirit and its innate capacity for goodness, even when faced with the most extreme circumstances. The aim is to inspire, to reveal that even in the darkest trenches, someone shared their light. The journey begins with a visceral depiction of wartime tension, a scene designed to immediately immerse the audience in the harsh realities of the era. This initial intensity will serve as a stark contrast to the unexpected act of compassion that will follow, acting as a powerful hook. This pivotal moment, the unexpected gesture that forms the crux of our narrative, will then initiate a deeper exploration of its immediate and long-term consequences. We will trace the ripple effect of this single act, examining the transformation it catalyzed in both the giver and the receiver, and the broader implications it held. This structured approach, moving from the immediate emotional impact to the lasting legacy, is designed to create a deeply moving and thought-provoking experience. The narrative will be rich with vivid sensory descriptions, painting a detailed picture of the historical settings and the emotional states of those within them. The language will be clear and accessible, yet imbued with a poetic quality and evocative metaphors that amplify the emotional resonance of the stories. We will employ a warm, human narrative voice, guiding the audience through these complex emotional landscapes with sensitivity and a profound understanding of the human condition. The inclusion of brief scientific and philosophical reflections on empathy and altruism, alongside personal accounts or historical documents, will add layers of authenticity and intellectual depth to the emotional core of the narrative, ensuring a balance between heart and mind. The script will unfold through a series of carefully constructed vignettes, each offering a glimpse into a different facet of this complex theme. We will move between moments of intense suspense and profound emotional release, showcasing the inherent drama of these historical encounters. The narrative will not shy away from the brutality of war, but will use it as a backdrop against which the extraordinary acts of compassion shine even brighter. The ultimate aim is to leave the audience with a sense of enduring hope, a profound understanding that while kindness may not end wars, it certainly survives them, a testament to the indomitable spirit that can find light even in the deepest of shadows. This is the story of those who, in the midst of global conflict, chose humanity. The war, a relentless tide of destruction, had a peculiar way of stripping away the veneer of civilization, forcing individuals to confront their most primal instincts. Yet, paradoxically, it was often in these very moments of extreme dehumanization that the most unexpected acts of profound humanity would surface. Consider the isolated skirmishes, the chaotic aftermath of skirmishes where wounded soldiers lay exposed, their cries of pain echoing across the desolate terrain. In such scenarios, the ingrained directives of combat to neutralize the enemy, to show no mercy, often clashed with a deeply ingrained, almost involuntary response to suffering. A German medic, tending to his own fallen comrades, might hear the desperate pleas of a British pilot, his leg mangled and bleeding profusely. The internal conflict would be immense, adherence to duty versus the visceral urge to alleviate pain, regardless of the uniform the suffering individual wore. Furthermore, the psychological strain of prolonged warfare, the constant exposure to death and mutility, could paradoxically foster a sense of shared victimhood among soldiers, regardless of their allegiance. This shared trauma could erode the carefully constructed barriers of animosity. Imagine a group of American soldiers, exhausted and demoralized after a brutal engagement in the Pacific, discovering a hidden cache of supplies. Among them, perhaps, were a few cans of peaches, a luxury beyond measure in their current state. Then they stumble upon a small, emaciated group of Japanese civilians, their faces etched with hunger and fear, hiding in the same jungle. The initial instinct might be suspicion, even hostility. However, the sight of such abject suffering, so starkly mirroring their own hardships, could trigger a different response. Building on this, the concept of moral disengagement plays a crucial role. When individuals are constantly bombarded with messages that dehumanize the enemy, their capacity for empathy naturally diminishes. However, direct, unmediated encounters can disrupt this process. A Soviet soldier, having witnessed unspeakable atrocities committed by his own forces, might find himself face to face with a German officer who, instead of displaying aggression, exhibits a weariness, a profound sadness that mirrors his own. This unexpected glimpse of shared vulnerability, this deviation from the expected monstrous portrayal, could crack the edifice of hatred. The officer perhaps offers a silent nod, a gesture of mutual recognition of the futility and horror of their situation, before disappearing back into the fog of war. Conversely, the very act of receiving a gesture of kindness from an enemy could precipitate a profound internal shift. A Japanese prisoner of war, accustomed to harsh treatment and the constant threat of violence, finds himself in a camp where a particular American guard, against regulations, begins to slip him extra rations. A piece of bread, a slightly larger portion of stew. This act, seemingly small in the grand scheme of the war, becomes monumental for the recipient. It is not just sustenance, it is a validation of his existence, a refutation of the dehumanizing propaganda he has endured. The guard's actions, perhaps driven by a quiet moral compass or a simple recognition of shared humanity, sow seeds of doubt in the prisoner's mind about the absolute evil attributed to his captors. Another crucial layer is the role of shared cultural touchstones, however rudimentary, that can emerge even between sworn enemies. Consider the unlikely scenario of two soldiers, one French and one German, finding themselves temporarily stranded together in a bombed-out village. They might share no common language, yet through gestures, they might share a piece of scavenged chocolate, or huddle together for warmth against the biting wind. The simple act of sharing a meager resource, of acknowledging the other's need for comfort, transcends linguistic and national divides. It is a primal communication of shared vulnerability, a recognition that beneath the uniforms and the flags, they are both simply men trying to survive an unimaginable ordeal. This shared experience, though brief, leaves an indelible mark, a quiet testament to a humanity that persists despite the surrounding chaos. The battlefield, a raw wound upon the earth, was not merely a theater of strategic maneuvers and clashing ideologies. It was also a crucible for the human psyche, a place where deeply ingrained social conditioning could be challenged by the stark realities of shared mortality. Beyond the direct impact of combat, the prolonged exposure to suffering, both witnessed and experienced, could foster a peculiar psychological phenomenon, the erosion of the outgroup bias. This is where the scientific understanding of empathy becomes particularly relevant. While evolutionary psychology often points to tribalism and in-group favoritism as survival mechanisms, extreme circumstances can, in fact, activate a more universal form of empathy. Consider the situation of a British soldier captured during the Battle of the Bulge, shivering in a hastily constructed German POW camp. His captors, themselves weary and often conscripted from diverse backgrounds within the Reich, were also enduring brutal conditions, facing dwindling supplies and the ever-present threat of Allied retribution. This shared hardship created a breeding ground for unexpected connections. Now imagine this captured soldier, Private Thomas Ashton, suffering from a severe case of frostbite. His feet are beginning to blacken, the pain is excruciating, and the rudimentary medical care provided is doing little to stem the tide of infection. A young German corporal, Klaus, tasked with overseeing the prisoners, notices Ashton's deteriorating condition. Klaus, too, has seen friends succumb to the harshness of the Eastern Front, has witnessed the agonizing deaths of men who, like Ashton, were merely following orders. He understands the chilling finality of gangrene. Against regulations, and risking severe punishment, Klaus begins to sneak Ashton extra blankets at night and, on one particularly daring occasion, procures a small vial of sulfa drugs from the camp's infirmary, ostensibly for a fictitious ailment of his own. He administers it to Ashton discreetly, a silent act of defiance against the war's brutal logic. Furthermore, the phenomenon of moral injury can also contribute to such acts. Soldiers on all sides often grappled with the psychological toll of actions they were forced to commit or witnessed others commit. This internal conflict could manifest as a profound disillusionment with the war's purported justifications. A French resistance fighter, captured and interrogated by the Gestapo, might encounter an SS officer who, while performing his duties, exhibits signs of deep moral conflict. Perhaps the officer, instead of resorting to immediate torture, engages in a lengthy, weary interrogation, his questions laced with a subtle, almost imperceptible weariness, a tacit acknowledgement of the futility of his task. He might even, in a moment of profound fatigue, inadvertently reveal a personal anecdote about his own family, humanizing himself in a way that is deeply disarming. This shared vulnerability, this glimpse of a person beyond the monstrous persona, can create a space for a nascent form of empathy, a recognition of shared human frailty. Conversely, the act of receiving such unexpected kindness could profoundly alter a prisoner's perception of the enemy, creating a complex emotional landscape that defied simple categorization. Consider the case of Sergeant Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese soldier captured after the fierce fighting on Okinawa. He had been indoctrinated with the belief that American soldiers were barbaric devils, intent on his utter annihilation and the desecration of his honor. Yet, in the POW camp, he observed American guards sharing cigarettes with their charges, engaging in rudimentary conversations, and even, in one instance, helping an elderly prisoner, recover a dropped mess kit. These were not acts of overt friendship, but small, almost incidental gestures that chipped away at the monolithic image of the enemy. Another crucial layer in understanding these encounters lies in the concept of reciprocal altruism, even in its most nascent form. While direct exchange might be impossible, the underlying principle of mutual benefit, however abstract, can play a role. An Australian soldier, fighting in the North African desert, might find himself separated from his unit. He stumbles upon a small group of Italian soldiers, equally lost and disoriented. Despite the animosity between their nations, a shared understanding of their predicament, thirst, exhaustion, the vastness of the unforgiving desert, could lead to a temporary truce. They might share a meager water ration, or point each other in a general direction that might lead to safety, not out of grand idealism, but out of a primal recognition that their immediate survival might, in some indirect way, be enhanced by a temporary cessation of hostilities. These encounters, though rare and often fleeting, illustrate a profound truth, that the instinct for self-preservation can, under certain conditions, intertwine with a deeply human impulse to connect, and, in rare instances, to extend compassion even across the deepest divides. The psychological impact of sustained exposure to violence could, in some individuals, paradoxically foster a heightened sense of shared vulnerability, leading to unexpected acts of empathy. Consider the unique pressures faced by those in logistical or support roles, often removed from the immediate front lines, but deeply affected by the war's pervasive atmosphere. A British supply officer stationed in a forward depot, tasked with distributing meager rations to exhausted troops, might witness the arrival of a contingent of German prisoners of war, recently captured and disoriented. While official policy dictated their internment and minimal sustenance, the officer, a man named Arthur Finch, had previously served in a less direct capacity, observing the toll the war took on civilians in occupied territories. He carried with him the memory of a Polish family, sharing their last loaf of bread with him when his own unit was cut off. Now, faced with these gaunt, defeated German soldiers, Finch felt a pang of recognition, not of an enemy, but of fellow humans caught in the same devastating conflict. He knew that strictly adhering to regulations would mean providing them with barely enough to survive, a stark contrast to the relative comfort his own side enjoyed. Driven by a memory of unexpected generosity, Finch began to subtly augment the prisoners' rations, diverting small quantities of extra biscuits and occasionally an apple from his own unit's allocation. He did this not out of any belief in appeasement, but out of a quiet conviction that the shared experience of hardship, regardless of uniform, demanded a basic level of human consideration. This act, while seemingly minor, represented a profound internal shift, an act of defiance against the dehumanizing narratives that defined the war. Furthermore, the phenomenon of compassion fatigue among combatants, while often leading to desensitization, could in some cases trigger an opposite reaction, a desperate clinging to any manifestation of normalcy and kindness. Soldiers on both sides, after prolonged periods of intense combat, often yearned for any respite from the relentless cycle of violence and death. This yearning could manifest in unexpected ways. Imagine a group of American GIs, recovering from a brutal offensive in the Ardennes, finding themselves temporarily billeted near a small, war-damaged French village. They observed a local woman, Madame Dubois, tending to her small garden, her movements slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the battlefield. One evening, a young American private, haunted by the faces of fallen comrades, found himself drawn to her garden. He didn't speak French, and she didn't speak English, but as he watched her carefully water a wilting rose bush, she looked up, met his gaze, and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. In that silent exchange, a profound connection formed. The soldier, accustomed to the aggression and fear of war, saw in her quiet act of tending to life a beacon of hope, a reminder of the world that existed beyond the conflict. He didn't approach her, nor did she offer him anything tangible. Yet, that moment of shared observation, of mutual acknowledgement of a shared desire for peace and continuity, provided a deep, albeit temporary, emotional solace. It was a testament to the idea that empathy doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it is found in the quiet recognition of another's humanity, in the shared appreciation for the simple act of tending to life amidst the destructive forces of war. This subtle, nonverbal communication underscored the idea that even when direct interaction was fraught with peril or impossibility, the capacity for understanding and shared feeling could still find a way to manifest, offering a profound, if fleeting, sense of relief. Consequently, the very structure of military operations could, in rare instances, create opportunities for such unexpected human interactions. Consider the complex logistics of prisoner processing, where individuals from opposing sides were temporarily brought into close proximity during the disarming and initial processing phases. A hardened veteran of the Pacific Campaign, tasked with guarding a group of newly captured Japanese soldiers, might find himself observing their meticulous, almost ritualistic way of cleaning their meager belongings. He had been conditioned to see them as fierce, almost inhuman adversaries. However, witnessing this quiet, orderly act of maintaining dignity in the face of utter defeat, he might recall his own grandfather's insistence on keeping his tools meticulously clean, a sign of respect for one's craft. This unexpected resonance, this flicker of recognition across the chasm of war, could momentarily soften his hardened demeanor. He might find himself looking at these men not as a monolithic enemy, but as individuals grappling with their own sense of honor and order in a chaotic world. This subtle shift in perception, born from observing a shared human inclination towards order and self-respect, could lead to a less harsh demeanor during the processing, a less aggressive tone in his commands. It was not an act of overt kindness, but a subtle recalibration of his perception, a recognition of shared human traits that transcended the imposed animosity of the war. This illustrates how even within the rigid confines of military procedure, the human capacity for nuanced observation and empathy could subtly influence interactions. The war's relentless pressure often fractured individuals, forcing them into extreme psychological states. Yet within this fragmentation, a surprising resilience of the human spirit could manifest, often through the lens of shared artistic or cultural appreciation, creating unexpected bonds. Consider the clandestine gatherings in occupied territories, where soldiers on opposing sides, drawn by a shared love for music or literature, might find themselves in fleeting, silent communion. Imagine a German officer, a former concert pianist stationed in Paris. During a rare lull in hostilities, he discovers a hidden stash of sheet music in a bombed-out apartment. Later, while on patrol, he encounters a young French civilian, also a musician, who recognizes the music. Though speaking different languages and on opposing sides of a bitter conflict, they might, through shared glances and hushed gestures, acknowledge a mutual passion. The officer might hum a few bars, the civilian might respond with a knowing nod, and for a brief, stolen moment, the war recedes, replaced by the universal language of melody. This shared appreciation for beauty, for art that transcends national boundaries, offered a sanctuary for the soul, a quiet rebellion against the destructive forces of war. Furthermore, the sheer randomness of war could thrust individuals into situations where their pre-existing moral frameworks were severely tested, leading to spontaneous acts of compassion. Think of the sheer chaos following a major artillery barrage. A young Soviet soldier, disoriented and separated from his unit, might stumble into a makeshift field hospital. Amidst the groans of the wounded, he sees not only his own comrades, but also enemy soldiers, equally battered and in pain. The immediate instinct might be to ignore them, to focus solely on his own side. However, the overwhelming sight of shared suffering, the raw, unadorned agony on every face, could trigger a powerful empathetic response. He might, without conscious thought, help a wounded German soldier adjust his bandages, or offer a sip of water to a man he was trained to kill. This wasn't a calculated act of mercy, but a primal, almost involuntary reaction to witnessing profound human suffering, a visceral rejection of the war's dehumanizing logic. Conversely, the concept of moral licensing could also play a role in these unexpected altruistic acts. Having committed acts that aligned with their duty and the brutal expectations of war, some soldiers might later feel a psychological need to counterbalance these actions. This could manifest as a quiet act of kindness towards an enemy, a way of reaffirming their own humanity. Consider a British pilot shot down over enemy territory, captured by German forces. He has participated in bombing raids, understanding the destructive consequences of his actions. Yet, as he awaits transport, he observes his captors, men who have also endured the regularities of war, sharing a cigarette, expressing weariness. One of them, perhaps a man who had seen his own home destroyed by Allied bombs, might offer the pilot a piece of stale bread. This act, born perhaps from a complex mix of duty, weariness, and a subconscious need to restore a sense of moral equilibrium, demonstrates how even within the rigid structure of warfare, individual psychological needs could lead to surprising expressions of empathy. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of children and their inherent innocence in bridging divides. In war-torn landscapes, children often represented a universal symbol of vulnerability and hope, transcending enemy lines. Imagine a scenario where a group of German soldiers, occupying a French village, witness a young French child wander too close to their perimeter, drawn by curiosity. Instead of apprehending or dismissing the child, the soldiers, perhaps reminded of their own families back home, might gently guide the child back towards the village center. This interaction, devoid of overt aggression or even direct communication, serves as a powerful testament to the universal human response to childhood innocence. The soldiers, in that moment, see not an enemy's child, but simply a child, a symbol of a future worth preserving, however distant it might seem. This shared, almost instinctual protective impulse towards a child could momentarily erase the lines of conflict, revealing a deeper shared humanity. The sheer unpredictability of battlefield encounters could also necessitate temporary alliances, fostering a grudging respect that could evolve into empathy. Consider a small patrol of American soldiers and a similar German unit finding themselves ambushed by an unknown third party, perhaps partisans or a rogue element. In such a dire situation, the immediate threat to their lives might compel them to a temporary, unspoken cooperation. They might fight side by side, covering each other's retreats, sharing meager ammunition. This shared struggle for survival, this mutual reliance against a common, immediate danger, could forge a bond of respect, however fragile. The enemy soldier, seen not as a target but as a comrade in the face of imminent death, could begin to be perceived differently, his competence and bravery recognized, paving the way for a more nuanced understanding that could, in rare instances, blossom into a flicker of empathy. The notion of moral injury in warfare, a concept gaining increasing recognition, offers a crucial lens through which to understand these paradoxical acts of compassion. This refers to the psychological distress that results from actions, or the witnessing of actions, that violate an individual's deeply held moral beliefs. Soldiers are often forced to commit or observe acts of extreme violence, acts that can leave them with profound guilt, shame, and a sense of betrayal of their own moral compass. In the aftermath of such experiences, an individual might feel an overwhelming need to somehow atone or reassert their fundamental humanity. Consider a Finnish soldier on the Eastern Front forced to participate in acts of brutality against Soviet civilians during the Continuation War. The guilt and psychological burden of these actions could become unbearable. Then, during a later, less intense phase of the conflict, he encounters a group of captured Soviet soldiers, not as hardened combatants, but as individuals clearly suffering from malnutrition and exposure. This soldier, driven by a deep-seated need to counteract the moral stain of his past actions, might discreetly share a portion of his own rations, or offer a word of comfort, not out of strategic necessity, but as a personal act of expiation, a way of reclaiming his own sense of morality in the face of overwhelming guilt. Building upon this, the phenomenon of dehumanization fatigue can also contribute to shifts in empathetic responses. While propaganda actively sought to dehumanize the enemy, the constant exposure to this narrative could, for some, lead to a weariness of perpetual animosity. The relentless effort required to maintain an attitude of unyielding hatred could become psychologically exhausting. Now imagine a German soldier who has spent years fighting on the Eastern Front, constantly bombarded with propaganda portraying Soviets as subhuman. He has witnessed and participated in horrific acts. Yet after years of grueling combat, witnessing the sheer resilience and shared suffering of his own comrades, he might begin to question the efficacy of such dehumanization. He might encounter a captured Soviet prisoner, not as a monstrous ideologue, but as a fellow soldier, equally weary, equally worn down by the relentless conflict. This soldier, perhaps a farmer conscripted into the Red Army, might exhibit simple human qualities, a love for his homeland, a longing for his family, that subtly undermine the propaganda. The German soldier, experiencing fatigue from sustained hatred, might find himself responding to these simple human cues, offering a moment of shared, silent understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared plight, rather than continuing the mandated animosity. Conversely, the concept of moral licensing offers another perspective on how seemingly contradictory actions can arise. Soldiers who have performed acts of extreme violence in accordance with their duty might, in certain circumstances, feel a subconscious need to balance these actions by engaging in acts of kindness. This is not necessarily a conscious decision to atone, but rather a psychological mechanism to maintain a sense of self-worth. Picture an American Marine during the brutal island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific. He has witnessed and participated in intense fighting, enduring the horrors of combat. Later, during a period of relative calm, he might encounter a group of Japanese civilians who have been displaced by the conflict and are living in precarious conditions. While his training dictates vigilance and suspicion, he might find himself offering them a small portion of his own rations or helping them repair a damaged shelter. This act, while potentially risky, could serve as a personal counterbalance to the violence he has experienced and inflicted, allowing him to feel a sense of moral equilibrium. Another crucial layer to consider is the impact of situational ethics, where the immediate context and perceived outcomes can override broader ideological commitments. During prolonged sieges or encirclements, the lines between combatant and civilian, and even between enemy factions, could blur out of necessity. Consider a scenario in Stalingrad, where both German and Soviet soldiers are trapped in the city's ruins, facing starvation and freezing temperatures. In such extreme circumstances, survival often trumped ideology. A desperate German soldier near death from hunger might encounter a starving Soviet soldier. Instead of fighting over a meager scrap of food, they might, in a moment of shared desperation, agree to share it, recognizing that their immediate, shared need for sustenance outweighs their national animosity. This is not an act of forgiveness or grand compassion, but a pragmatic, situation-driven decision that acknowledges a common, immediate threat, leading to a temporary, albeit profound, suspension of hostilities born from mutual necessity. This pragmatic approach, driven by the existential realities of the moment, highlights how, even in the heart of total war, a raw, unvarnished form of human solidarity could emerge. The profound psychological impact of prolonged exposure to the fog of war could, counterintuitively, lead to a heightened sense of shared human experience, even among sworn enemies. This phenomenon, distinct from mere fatigue, involved a deep-seated weariness with the constant threat and the pervasive atmosphere of animosity, fostering a yearning for normalcy and connection. Consider the unexpected instances of shared cultural practices that could emerge in the most unlikely settings. A group of German soldiers occupying a French town might discover a local bakery, still miraculously intact. The baker, initially terrified, might be compelled by the soldiers to continue his trade, not out of coercion alone, but perhaps out of a shared, unspoken desire for the familiar rhythm of daily life. The soldiers, in turn, might not demand every loaf, but, through gestures and shared glances, acknowledge the baker's own need for sustenance, perhaps leaving him a small portion of the day's output. This wasn't an act of grand forgiveness, but a quiet recognition of a shared human need for routine and normalcy, a subtle rebellion against the war's chaos. Building on this, the concept of moral licensing offers a compelling explanation for why individuals might engage in acts of kindness towards perceived enemies. Having performed acts that aligned with the brutal expectations of war, acts that might have violated their personal moral codes, some soldiers might later feel a subconscious need to counterbalance these actions. This could manifest as a quiet act of kindness towards an enemy, a way of reasserting their own fundamental humanity. Imagine a British pilot shot down over enemy territory, captured by German forces. He has participated in bombing raids, understanding the destructive consequences of his actions. Yet, as he awaits transport, he observes his captors, men who have also endured the regularities of war, sharing a cigarette, expressing weariness. One of them, Perhaps a man who had seen his own home destroyed by Allied bombs might offer the pilot a piece of stale bread. This act, born perhaps from a complex mix of duty, weariness, and a subconscious need to restore a sense of moral equilibrium, demonstrates how even within the rigid structure of warfare, individual psychological needs could lead to surprising expressions of empathy. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of children and their inherent innocence in bridging divides. In war-torn landscapes, children often represented a universal symbol of vulnerability and hope, transcending enemy lines. Imagine a scenario where a group of German soldiers, occupying a French village, witness a young French child wander too close to their perimeter, drawn by curiosity. Instead of apprehending or dismissing the child, the soldiers, perhaps reminded of their own families back home, might gently guide the child back towards the village center. This interaction, devoid of overt aggression or even direct communication, serves as a powerful testament to the universal human response to childhood innocence. The soldiers, in that moment, see not an enemy's child, but simply a child, a symbol of a future worth preserving, however distant it might seem. This shared, almost instinctual, protective impulse towards a child could momentarily erase the lines of conflict, revealing a deeper, shared humanity. Conversely, the sheer unpredictability of battlefield encounters could also necessitate temporary alliances, fostering a grudging respect that could evolve into empathy. Consider a small patrol of American soldiers and a similar German unit finding themselves ambushed by an unknown third party, perhaps partisans or a rogue element. In such a dire situation, the immediate threat to their lives might compel them to a temporary, unspoken cooperation. They might fight side by side, covering each other's retreats, sharing meager ammunition. This shared struggle for survival, this mutual reliance against a common, immediate danger, could forge a bond of respect, however fragile. The enemy soldier, seen not as a target but as a comrade in the face of imminent death, could begin to be perceived differently, his competence and bravery recognized, paving the way for a more nuanced understanding that could, in rare instances, blossom into a flicker of empathy. This pragmatic approach, driven by the existential realities of the moment, highlights how even in the heart of total war, a raw, unvarnished form of human solidarity could emerge, demonstrating that necessity can, indeed, be the mother of a peculiar kind of kinship. The psychological toll of prolonged conflict often manifested not just in aggression, but in a deep-seated weariness that could erode the very foundations of ingrained hostility. This weariness, a profound exhaustion of the spirit, could open unexpected avenues for empathy. Consider the compassion fatigue experienced by frontline medics, who, after witnessing an unending stream of casualties, might develop a detached demeanor as a coping mechanism. Yet this very detachment could, in rare instances, be followed by a counter-reaction, a desperate grasp for any sign of shared humanity. Imagine a young German medic, Private Schmidt, who has seen his share of horrific injuries. He's become adept at compartmentalizing, at focusing solely on the task at hand. Then, one brutal winter night, tending to a group of captured Soviet soldiers suffering from severe frostbite, he observes one of them, a grizzled veteran, carefully mending a torn glove with painstaking precision despite his own agony. This act of meticulous care for a mundane object in the face of imminent death strikes Schmidt not as enemy defiance, but as a deeply human act of preserving a semblance of order and dignity. This observation bypasses his trained response of seeing an enemy and triggers a recognition of shared human resilience, leading him to offer a slightly warmer blanket, a gesture born not of policy, but of a sudden, overwhelming empathy for the shared struggle against both the elements and the war's crushing despair. Furthermore, the concept of moral licensing offers a compelling explanation for why individuals might engage in acts of kindness towards perceived enemies. Having performed acts that aligned with the brutal expectations of war, acts that might have violated their personal moral codes, some soldiers might later feel a subconscious need to counterbalance these actions. This could manifest as a quiet act of kindness towards an enemy, a way of reasserting their own fundamental humanity. Picture a British pilot shot down over enemy territory, captured by German forces. He has participated in bombing raids, understanding the destructive consequences of his actions. Yet, as he awaits transport, he observes his captors, men who have also endured the regularities of war, sharing a cigarette, expressing weariness. One of them, perhaps a man who had seen his own home destroyed by Allied bombs, might offer the pilot a piece of stale bread. This act, born perhaps from a complex mix of duty, weariness, and a subconscious need to restore a sense of moral equilibrium, demonstrates how even within the rigid structure of warfare, individual psychological needs could lead to surprising expressions of empathy. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of children and their inherent innocence in bridging divides. In war-torn landscapes, children often represented a universal symbol of vulnerability and hope, transcending enemy lines. Imagine a scenario where a group of German soldiers, occupying a French village, witness a young French child wander too close to their perimeter, drawn by curiosity. Instead of apprehending or dismissing the child, the soldiers, perhaps reminded of their own families back home, might gently guide the child back towards the village center. This interaction, devoid of overt aggression or even direct communication, serves as a powerful testament to the universal human response to childhood innocence. The soldiers, in that moment, see not an enemy's child, but simply a child, a symbol of a future worth preserving, however distant it might seem. This shared, almost instinctual, protective impulse towards a child could momentarily erase the lines of conflict, revealing a deeper, shared humanity. Conversely, the sheer unpredictability of battlefield encounters could also necessitate temporary alliances, fostering a grudging respect that could evolve into empathy. Consider a small patrol of American soldiers and a similar German unit finding themselves ambushed by an unknown third party, perhaps partisans or a rogue element. In such a dire situation, the immediate threat to their lives might compel them to a temporary, unspoken cooperation. They might fight side by side, covering each other's retreats, sharing meager ammunition. This shared struggle for survival, this mutual reliance against a common, immediate danger, could forge a bond of respect, however fragile. The enemy soldier, seen not as a target but as a comrade in the face of imminent death, could begin to be perceived differently, his competence and bravery recognized, paving the way for a more nuanced understanding that could, in rare instances, blossom into a flicker of empathy. This pragmatic approach, driven by the existential realities of the moment, highlights how even in the heart of total war, a raw, unvarnished form of human solidarity could emerge, demonstrating that necessity can indeed be the mother of a peculiar kind of kinship. The phenomenon of moral disengagement played a critical role in how soldiers perceived and interacted with their enemies, often creating a psychological buffer that allowed for the perpetration of violence. However, the very mechanisms that facilitated this disengagement could, under certain circumstances, become conduits for empathy. Consider the process of euphemistic labeling, where acts of aggression are cloaked in innocuous language. A soldier might refer to a bombing raid as a softening up operation, or the killing of enemy combatants as neutralizing targets. While this language dehumanized the victims and sanitized the violence, the constant repetition of such euphemisms could, for some, breed a sense of detachment that, paradoxically, made it easier to recognize shared humanity when confronted with it directly. Now, imagine a Russian soldier who has participated in countless clearing operations, his actions often described in detached clinical terms. He has witnessed unspeakable brutality, yet the language used has kept it at an emotional arm's length. Then, during a prolonged period of stalemate, he finds himself in close proximity to a small group of German soldiers, equally trapped by the circumstances. He observes one of them meticulously carving a small wooden bird, a seemingly pointless act in the midst of war. This simple, almost innocent act, performed by someone labeled as a dehumanized target, could pierce through the layers of euphemism and trigger a recognition of shared creative impulse, a quiet yearning for beauty amidst the ugliness. Building on this, the concept of advantageous comparison often allowed soldiers to rationalize their own actions by comparing them to even more horrific deeds committed by the enemy. This cognitive distortion, while enabling individuals to cope with the atrocities they witnessed or participated in, could also create a subtle opening for empathy. If a soldier believes the enemy is inherently monstrous, any deviation from that perceived monstrosity becomes noteworthy. Consider a situation where a group of Italian soldiers, having endured severe hardship, and perhaps witness the brutal efficiency of their German allies encounter a group of Allied prisoners. If their own experiences have been particularly harrowing, and if the Allied soldiers, despite their capture, exhibit a degree of discipline or camaraderie that contrasts with the brutality they themselves may have witnessed or been forced to enact, a shift in perception can occur. The Italian soldiers might not suddenly feel affection, but the advantageous comparison. We are suffering greatly, and they, though captured, maintain a certain order, could lead to a less hostile interaction, perhaps a shared moment of silent acknowledgement of their mutual predicament, rather than outright aggression. Conversely, the psychological impact of displacement of responsibility, where individuals feel compelled to act due to orders from authority figures, could lead to a form of moral fatigue that, in turn, facilitates empathy. Soldiers who feel they have little agency in their actions, that they are merely cogs in a larger war machine, might experience a detachment from the consequences of their deeds. This detachment, however, can create a psychological space where their own suppressed moral compass can reassert itself. Imagine a young conscript in the Wehrmacht, forced to participate in actions he finds morally reprehensible, but compelled by the chain of command. Years later, perhaps in a POW camp or after the war, he encounters someone who was a victim of those actions, or someone who understands the immense pressure he was under. In that moment of shared understanding, where the burden of responsibility is acknowledged and perhaps even shared, a pathway to empathy can open. The soldier, relieved of the sole burden of guilt, can begin to see the humanity of those he once perceived as mere objectives. Another crucial layer involves the role of dehumanization fatigue. While propaganda actively sought to portray the enemy as subhuman, the relentless effort required to maintain this attitude could, for some, become psychologically exhausting. The constant need to suppress any flicker of empathy, to view fellow humans as mere objects, could lead to a profound weariness. Picture a hardened veteran on the D-Day beaches, having witnessed and participated in unimaginable carnage. He has been conditioned to see the Germans as an enemy to be destroyed without mercy. Yet, after days of relentless fighting, he encounters a lone German soldier, wounded and disoriented, not a threat, but a figure of utter defeat. The sheer exhaustion of maintaining a state of constant, dehumanizing aggression could, in that moment, give way to a simple recognition of shared human frailty, leading to an act of passive non-aggression, perhaps simply walking past, acknowledging the other's suffering without engaging in further violence. This subtle shift, born from the weariness of sustained hatred, underscores the resilience of the human capacity for recognition, even when deeply suppressed. The relentless grind of total war often fostered a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance, a state of mental discomfort arising from holding conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. This was particularly acute for soldiers who, while participating in acts of violence, retained a fundamental belief in their own moral integrity. This internal conflict could manifest in peculiar ways, sometimes leading to an unexpected softening of attitude towards the enemy. Now consider how this applies when you face a situation where your actions, dictated by the brutal logic of war, clash with your innate sense of fairness. Imagine a German soldier, part of an occupying force, who has been involved in requisitions that have severely impacted a local civilian population. He may have witnessed the genuine hardship these actions have caused, yet felt compelled by duty and the threat of severe punishment to carry them out. Later, perhaps during a prolonged period of relative quiet, he might encounter a civilian, an individual who has directly suffered from these requisitions, perhaps a shopkeeper whose meager inventory was confiscated. Instead of further asserting dominance, this soldier, grappling with his own cognitive dissonance, might engage in a subtle act of restitution. He might, for instance, discreetly leave a small portion of his own rations near the shopkeeper's door, or offer a brief, almost imperceptible nod of apology. This act is not born of a grand ideological shift, but from a deep-seated need to alleviate the internal discomfort caused by the conflict between his duty and his conscience, a quiet attempt to restore a fractured sense of personal morality. Building on this, the concept of situational altruism offers a compelling lens through which to understand these paradoxical acts of compassion. This refers to instances where altruistic behavior, normally suppressed by the prevailing animosity of war, emerges due to specific, immediate circumstances that highlight a shared vulnerability or a common threat. It's not about a fundamental change of heart, but a temporary suspension of hostility driven by immediate shared needs. Consider the harrowing conditions faced by both sides during the brutal winter campaigns. A Finnish soldier fighting against Soviet forces might find himself in a desperate situation, severely injured and exposed to the elements. If, by chance, a small group of Soviet soldiers, equally beleaguered and perhaps separated from their own lines, discover him, their response might transcend the dictates of war. Faced with the immediate, visceral reality of a fellow human being succumbing to the same brutal conditions, their training and ingrained animosity might momentarily recede. They might, out of a shared understanding of the unforgiving environment, offer him a sip of water or point him towards a less exposed path, not out of affection, but out of a primal recognition of shared vulnerability. This act, born from the immediate exigencies of survival, demonstrates how situational pressures can override deeply ingrained hostilities.